Hello, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Sean made Dave stop telling a story before we got on today, which, by the way, hold on, I always forget this part. I don't want to do that. We're going to discuss when a story gets stuck, like how we deal with that.
Is
but
Dave
then,
leading this conversation?
well, we're going to move back to Sean said, well, hold on, I don't want to tell the same story twice or something like that.
Oh, we're starting right in on that. Okay. So
How else would we start?
I'm editing two of Dave's books back to back. And I think it's super, Dave and names are super funny. So this came up because we were talking about Stan, and all of our books have a Stan. And for those who have not heard this conversation before, it goes back to, I don't know, maybe a year ago. We realized that Dave had a lot of Stans in the books.
Funnily, I don't even know a single Stan. I don't think I've
That's
ever
what
known
he
a Stan.
said a year ago. He's like, I don't use that name.
I don't know any Stans, so I'm going to make a bunch of friends.
And
Stanley, they're talking to me. What?
So I'm like, no, dude, you use Stan or Stanley a lot. He's like, no, I don't. And then so it's become like, it was like when one of our editors pointed out that Dave liked to write people going to the bathroom in every book, and I didn't realize it until that was pointed out to me, and now I can't not see it.
Well, it's like Tarantino and feet. I think you got to lean in.
No, I do. I absolutely do.
I got to do pissing on feet, and then
I can see Dave in one of those like Film Riot or whatever that series is where they say, it's a film if
for sure. And in fact, the
three
last
characters named Stan, and then they go on about it.
The last draft that I had passed to Bonnie, and Bonnie edited it and sent it back to me, I had a scene where I had someone to go to the bathroom, and I just said, this is for Dave in the comments. And she goes, well, sorry, Dave, it doesn't add to the story. And she cut it out.
Wait. So what about my next book, Stanley's Piss Palace? Is that now off the table?
Oh, that is on the table. That's what Johnny's saying. Lean in.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, I that's basically the same joke I was going to make, but maybe half serious is like do something that centers on urinals or urine or something. You could just go nuts.
Maybe he's a urinal inspector. Someone who works at the movie theater has to like resupply the cakes.
Now, the funny thing here is that you're going to lean in and Dave's going to become phenomenally successful and be forever boxed in as the guy who, they won't let me out of this box. All I can write about is pee and Stan.
We'll have one-star reviews. Not enough piss.
I came here for piss, and all this had was shit.
So
I love that.
So it is like a new vocabulary word, and I'm seeing it everywhere. And what's really hilarious is if you go back to episode 1 of season 1 of Yesterday's Gone, there's a Stan. And on and on and on. All of our books have a Stan. Anyway, Dave is so funny with his names because there's maybe 20, and that's it.
I hate you so much.
And so this last draft, there's something funny that I have to share with everybody because so we're in prison. One of Dave's favorite names is Carl.
Oh, how many of your stories start that way?
One of Dave's favorite names is Carl with a K. All right. And he's
like in Die Hard.
He's incapable of naming a white supremacist anything but Carl with a K.
It's because every white supremacist I know is named Carl.
All right. And here's what's hilarious. So I'm editing this and I'm like, wait a minute. So, of course, we also can't have any prison scenes without major Aryan Nation characters. Like, that's just...
They're one of the factions. Fuck you.
Okay, so right, but we got to focus on them because they're extra evil, right? So,
what are you defending them now?
Not at all. So there's
Why? Go ahead and make the black people evil like you always do.
Dave, you're just trying to cover for that town not being a massacre in Watchmen.
I'm leaning the other way now.
So anyway, there's a character named
Hi, welcome to Offend Everybody Friday.
Like I know I've seen this character before, and sure enough, the very last time we had, a prison scene with a white supremacist, his name was Carl with a K.
Was it number 4 in the series?
No, but I will tell you something hilarious. So, the two girls you have going to Burger King,
Yeah.
You named one of them Brianna.
Uh-huh.
Who Brianna was Callum's girlfriend who was murdered. So this isn't the same series, and the chapter before literally references this murdered girl, and so I'm like, I'm having to like put the story together. Wait, what?
There's a lot of Briannas. If you go to it at any school around here, there's like 20 Briannas.
If you go to our catalog, there's 20 Briannas. Anyway, so that's not my something cool, but I do think it is.
Well, I will say that in Dave's defense, I don't think that this is a creativity issue or anything like that. I think this is a memory issue, because if you if you took me and gave me Dave's Memento style short-term memory, I think I would do the same thing too, because I'm
running out of room to talk right on my body.
I default to I think I have a few names that I would be defaulting to, and then there's always this sensor that says, well, wait a minute, I used that recently, and then I pivot. But if you don't have that, like Dave has no memory, so I think that's the only fault. He's just not pivoting away. All right, so should we move to something cools?
Yeah.
Or you just make the whole show about this. It'd just be fun.
I could do that.
Yeah. So something cool. Why don't you go first, Sean? You've been going last recently, I think.
Okay, well, rarely I'm going to do something cool. Dave's done this a bunch, but I usually do something cool that I've seen or experienced. This one is something I'm going to. So it's like a new game coming out that I'm excited to play. But it's have you guys heard of the show Upload?
Actually, no.
No.
So it comes out today on Amazon Prime, and it's a show about a retirement community that is virtual. So you upload yourself there. So a little like San Junipero in Black Mirror.
Right.
But
Or just basically like tomorrow with the whole coronavirus thing. Like, because forget regular retired homes.
So it's
I can't wait to upload myself.
I know Dave, he's like, my chance to have a good life.
Next time we do a podcast, we're just gonna have the HAL 2000, from 2001, like the HAL
Dave
computer
is
just
not
sitting there.
here now.
Dave 2000.
Oh, and your name's Dave. I didn't even think of that connection. I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
So it's developed by Greg Daniels, who did The Office and Parks and Rec and The Good Place.
So it's comedy?
Yeah, so it's a comedic take, and it's just 10 episodes on Amazon Prime, and I love that guy's aesthetic with just 10 episodes. I think it'll be something really fun, so I'm looking forward to watching that.
My something cool is something I feel like you have mentioned before. Maybe you didn't. It feels like a show you would love, though. Sex Education on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen both seasons. I love it.
Oh, I fucking love that show. I didn't think I would, but it's just so damn good. I like how they...
Why didn't you think you'd like it before you tell me why you did? Or
I'm not big on comedies because they're so hit and miss with me. And also it's like I don't like goofy high school shit. I like more serious, like...
You like emo high school.
Well, I like coming of age sort of like depressing ass shit, and this has both comedy and that, so I like that, and this is really damn good, and they talk about some serious shit, and I like it, and the characters are very well rounded for the most part, except like the headmaster. He's like a one-note character.
Yeah.
You're right. Are you into season 2? Because I think they soften him up.
Season 2, I'm like, I don't know. I got 3 or 4 episodes left.
Yeah, I think you get a little more depth with them. I love Gillian Anderson on that show. I think she's wonderful. I like her better in this than I liked her in the X-Files.
I agree, and I really like the actress who plays Maeve, and I like I like Otis. I like how flawed Otis is. I love how he's kind of a little dick. Like, he doesn't know how to admit when he's wrong. You know, he has a lot of the flaws that actual male teenagers do, but reflected in a way that television usually gives male teenagers a whole different set of bullshit, but I like how Otis is portrayed. I like the serious subjects that they talk about in a I don't know, it's a safe, friendly, fun bubble, but they're talking about serious stuff, and it's also like kind of a magical setting because it takes place in England, but they're like American high schools. So it's got this like anywhere.
And everybody looks like 25 or older. I felt like it should have been college. It would have been better, but maybe they couldn't have had the same issues.
I
college doesn't have the same impact, unfortunately.
Yeah, high school, people know each other, and they are young enough to...
It's just enough to be not scandalous, but you know what I mean? It's just a tad more because they're younger. It's not, college is like, well, they're adults.
Yeah, and everybody, like, they need to be older, you know, but like I get that. We're watching Outer Banks. Have you guys seen that?
No.
You know, we're watching it with Ethan and Haley. It's basically like, I think Netflix is getting pretty good at making CW shows, but they're always a lot better than the CW. Right?
You mean like Riverdale? You watching that with them next?
Yeah, actually, Outer Banks makes fun of Riverdale. So no, it's they take like,
that was not a serious suggestion, by the way. I just don't want anyone to think that I'm liking Riverdale.
No, Johnny hate watches Riverdale. Operative word being hate. So, like, you was that Dave? It seems like you would have watched You. Did you watch You?
Yeah, I watched that.
So You feels like a very CW show to me, but
it was a Lifetime Network show.
Higher quality, yeah. No,
it was on Lifetime first.
Lifetime show.
No, the first season aired on Lifetime.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then Netflix bought it up. I guess I don't think it did well on there.
Well, Netflix
that's not surprising.
To serve that too. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. So Outer Banks is like a cross between Goonies, which Dave hates. There's a little bit of Veronica Mars. There's
which I've never seen,
which is exceptional. Like, it really is good. You should watch it. A little bit of Dawson's Creek. It's good, and it's a treasure hunt thing. Like, you know, disappearing dad. There's a whole mystery. Anyway, it has this CW vibe, but I don't know. The point is, the lead guy is, I think, 26 years old, 20, maybe even 29. He's old, but he's got this like River Phoenix thing going on, and everyone around him is like 21, 22. I looked on IMDb, but he's almost 30 years old. And I can't imagine someone, like, he brings a weight to it. He brings an anchor to it. And I know he's so much older. You know, the person who's playing his girlfriend is 18. So technically he could have fathered her. Right.
Fucking creepy, man.
but I don't know. Like, sometimes it really bothers me, but in the right context, when you know, like, the show needs a little bit of weight in the lead, I'm just okay with it.
Mine is a repeat, but not one that I've ever talked about on the show. I rewatched Hero, which was a Ryan Kirk recommendation. And we actually all saw it before. Well, Dave wasn't on that, but Sean was there and Bonnie was there when we did one of our retreats.
No ROI.
It's just such that's just such a beautiful movie. It's just so, like, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's just so elegantly shot. I mean, the structure is very interesting as well. Obviously, it's Chinese.
But it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I watched the subtitle. I assume there's a dubbed version, but it's beautiful. There's these scenes where it's just like she's walking through the woods and all the leaves are orange falling down, and they're wearing orange.
It looks like a fighting game, but brought to life. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's like a painting or something, and there's such epic levels of badass in it. I had forgotten this is, I guess, a minor spoiler, at least in terms of a spectacle. So blink away if you don't want to hear it. But the scene where they're in the calligraphy school and the guy's like, no, this is like, you know, the armies are attacking thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of archers.
And they're doing calligraphy in the sand.
They're like all fleeing as the arrows are coming in and killing everybody. And the old wizened Chinese man leader who's running it is like, you know, no, calligraphy writing is a link to our way of life. I forget his exact argument. And then he goes in and just resumes drawing, and the arrows are like punching perfectly around him. They mysteriously never hit him, and he just keeps drawing like a badass. It's so awesome.
It's so awesome. Have you seen House of Flying Daggers?
I think I have. No. I saw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
House of Flying Daggers is the same guy who made Hero.
Yeah.
And it has the same. It looks totally different, but it's equally beautiful. There's a lot of greens. There's this amazing fight that takes place in a bamboo forest where they're like climbing up on the bamboos and fighting, and it's just gorgeous. The guy made one English language movie, which what I've heard is really pretty, but it's just kind of a shitty movie. It's still a visual spectacle, and it has Matt Damon in it, and it's about the Great Wall of China. It's called The Great Wall, I think. But I never saw it.
Does Matt Damon in a Chinese movie? Does he play a white guy?
I don't know. It looked like I thought it looked like a kind of a joke movie, and it got bad reviews, so I never saw it. It wasn't until much later when I heard that it was that guy who made the movie, and then I was like, oh, that's what happened. Like, I get it. He made this beautiful movie, and his stuff is like really, it's like what Johnny was saying, you know, calligraphy is our way of life. Like the dialogue that they use in his movies wouldn't really translate to an
No,
American
it only works because it's, I mean, at least
Difficult.
for Hero, I haven't seen, yeah, exactly. It's like you have to suspend disbelief because it's like a fable.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the Native American fables or something about, you know, the turtle rolled the earth off his back or whatever that thing is. It's like these outrageous, bigger than life sorts of things. It's like Big Fish, honestly, in a weird way, in that it's about stories. So you suspend disbelief when the archers are attacking or whatever because it works. But the things they say are similarly grandiose, and the dialogue wouldn't work in another.
It doesn't work with
movie.
someone born in, you know, Boston. Like it doesn't work. So I don't know. I'm much more curious to see it now that I know who made it, because I could just, you know, not pay attention to the dialogue. And like his movies are worth seeing for the spectacle, because it's not like going to see an Avengers movie, which is a different kind of spectacle. It's real CG. This is like beautiful wire work and color and fabric.
I'm curious how much of that, it probably is almost entirely practical effects, right?
Yeah,
like I can't imagine there's any CG.
He does like, especially Flying Daggers, I think he does CG like touch up and color correction and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like he's shooting in front of green screens. Like it's old fashioned filmmaking on like huge scale. And I don't know, there's something really beautiful about that is, you don't see it in American films, like ever. Like, I don't know that I would compare it to.
No, nothing like that. But then you get like a Zack Snyder or something, which are beautiful for different reasons.
Yeah.
And similarly uneven, I would argue. There's a lot of his movies that they aren't that great, but they're beautiful.
Yeah, Hero is Asian Sucker Punch. I mean, really, because Sucker Punch it fits this exact mold where if you want to talk about it as a movie, you're not going to be impressive. But if you want to talk about it as a spectacle, it's probably worth your time.
Yeah, well, that's where we lose Dave. So I guess we should move into the topic at this point. So we're going to talk about when a story gets stuck, and I mean, appropriately, we've all said it. Well, when's the last time you had a stuck story, Sean?
Stuck as in I actually don't know what to do next, or stuck in terms of motivation?
Well, I would actually that was actually something I was going to add to our punch list here, is that I think a lot of it is just there's nothing you can do other than get out of your headspace. And so for me, that's an emotional sort of stuck. And that, see, the trick with the project we've talked about a few times that I finished about a month ago and Sean has now, is that it was both. It was emotional. It was mechanically stuck. Like I couldn't figure out what to do. I couldn't figure out how to put the pieces together. And then that, in addition to some other things, caused emotional stuck where it was like, well, fuck it. Now I don't want to do it. Like it's really hard and I'm bummed out by it and I just can't get my head out of it, or there's external circumstances. So by any definition, I would say.
Okay. Story-wise, I can't even remember the last time I've been stuck.
Well, hold on. So caveat, because you may be about to answer this, but since you said I've never been really stuck story-wise, do external circumstances ever cause the same feeling as story stuck?
Yes, absolutely. But I would say that the secret now for me is that we have enough people in our community, our little story studio, that whatever I need, I know who I can go to get that thing. So, you know, if I want, I don't know, if I need to kind of decode what's sticking me on a story, like Bonnie's always a great go-to, because I can get off the phone half an hour and be like, okay. And she'll usually not just let me go and do my thing. She'll give me bullet points later that I can operate off of. So that's always like really helpful to get me going. If it's like, I don't know, the business is weighing me down, that's a different conversation, but that can happen and it can affect my time on the page.
Because you need a certain muscle.
You need headspace.
Yeah, you need like there's a figurative muscle that lets you say, okay, I can turn this over in my head. I can find the solution. I can put the pieces together. Because to me, and just as a slight diversion on this, it is quasi mystical for me. It's really weird. My current story, I have several different groups, and I really don't know the ending at all. Like Sean's ending in From the Beats is irrelevant at this point, other than the biggest picture. And it's like, oh, they are getting together. Oh, this is happening. Oh, I didn't forget that important thing that didn't mean anything a while ago. It's just there. And I think that that takes a certain space or muscle, to use the earlier metaphor, and it's harder to access that when you're besieged by something else. It's like how, the metaphor of AIDS makes you unable to fight infection. It's not in and of itself the problem, it's that it pulls down your defenses. And it feels the same way to me with external factors.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The hardest project I've had in a long time. Actually, no, I can think of two, and they were back to back. The one I started the year with and the one I ended the year with. So the one I ended the year with was actually an outline from Dave. And it's the first thing that I think in a long time that I got about halfway through and I just abandoned the project. And there was nothing wrong with Dave's outline at all. It was just that I realized this is a much bigger and different story, because I kind of gave him the prompt. I'm like, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. And it was just a bigger, much bigger story. And it wasn't really a CI story. Once I started to tell it, I realized there was a focal darkness to it that I didn't want there. I wanted it to be a bigger story. So I did have a lot of resistance there, and I tried to push through it. And then I realized I'm just not writing the right story. And it goes back to what we've always said, that writer's block is really an artifact of writing the wrong thing. Either you're not excited about it or you're not prepared to write it. And so,
I don't want to interrupt you, but do you still think that that's, because I think I used to agree with that and I don't anymore, because when I was having some shit, I don't think it would have mattered what story I went to. I think I was just in the shit.
Well, yes, but I think you would still make the same argument that, well, then you're not excited to write about the thing, right? I mean, it still is one or the other. Either you're not prepared to write what it is. And for that last project, we weren't prepared because, like you said, it was mechanically broken, but then there was emotional stuff, which meant that you weren't excited about it. So it still fits. So with this last project for me last year, I was emotionally there. Like it's a subject matter I really want to tap into. It's a story I really wanted to tell, but I wasn't prepared to write it because I had the wrong story in front of me. I had the wrong version of that story in front of me. And then I started the year with, if you've heard us talk about that Steal This project before, which actually came up in an earlier meeting today, because I've written that a few times and it's a novella. They're always like 30-ish thousand words. And so it should have been something I flew through and I really dragged ass. Incidentally, Johnny's version of that story is 84,000 words, which is pretty funny. And so,
Wait, which one is this?
I can give the title. It's The Target.
Oh, okay. And the original plan was,
well, it's a pretty lean outline with 20 chapters. And so, ours just went way longer. It had more chapters, it had more things going on, had more characters, had more twists. And so the version I was starting with was same outline, but totally different story. And it had zombies in it. And I didn't really know the characters, and the way the outline was structured, it was real action heavy, which even though the joke used to be, I can't write action. I actually like writing action now, but it really needs to be character-based action. I really need to care about the characters or the action feels empty to me. And so I really did struggle with that. And I had to force myself through it. It was, I want to say 34,000 words total. And it took me, I want to say 3 weeks, which is a long, I could do 34,000 words in a week, no problem, and not even writing heavy each day. So that was a long time for me, and I didn't love the story. Now, here's the interesting thing about that particular novella is that I wrote it pre-corona. I wrote it in January, and then when I went back to edit it, it was just a month ago, and all of this bullshit has already happened. So revisiting that same story like felt weird. And I know that, we're having the same thing. We're going to revisit another story that's kind of similar to that, in that respect. So just, it's a little odd. It's a little weird in that way.
What about you, Dave? When's the last time what do you do when you get stuck? I mean,
every story.
do you think it's, I mean, in all honesty, you think it's part of your process?
I don't know if it's part of my it happens a lot in my process. Like, basically,
it's a part of your process. You just don't want it to be.
Well, and if it's part of your process, but you don't want it to be or whatever, like, does it at least not freak you out as much because you understand that it's normal, even if not desired?
It depends how past my deadline is. That's like how freaked out I get. And I know Sean doesn't think I care about deadlines, but I do. And it depends how big the story is. Like, if it's a giant series, it's way more stressful. If it's a one-off, then I feel like it's easier because there's not as much.
More one-offs.
Well, there's not as much to live up to or to let down the audience or whatever. For me, though, it comes when so when I do the outline, or if we do an outline, a brainstorm or whatever, it usually feels really good when I start the story. But then as I get into the story and I'm feeling the world through the characters, it's like I'm playing pretend. It's like when I was, a little kid and I had my Star Wars toys, I play pretend. All of a sudden, oh, that doesn't work for this reason. That doesn't work for this reason. And I could kind of make them work, but it doesn't feel true to the story as I see it through the characters. Like, yeah, I could make this thing jam, but it doesn't feel natural. So I have to think, well, what would work? And then I have to change a lot of shit. And sometimes it's more difficult than others. And other times it's fucking impossible. So.
Well, I will say on this last draft that Dave just turned in, it is a last book in a series. And dude, you did a really good job making it feel like a last book in the series. Now, I haven't finished it, so I don't know.
Oh, I was curious what you thought of the end. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so I don't know, but I can feel like there's no warning bells whatsoever, and it feels really good. I can feel like natural conclusions kind of happening, and I feel like as a reader, not as an editor, but as a reader of the series, there's certain things that I would want to happen, and I'm seeing those things happen, and I'm believing all the characters, and there's things that I don't like that happened because they feel like real to life that they would happen, like the way a partner is behaving, or a bad guy winning just by virtue of where they end up positioning, and there's certain characters I don't have a lot of book left, and something bad happened to them. So I can see why this last one took you a long time. I'm not saying that the huge delay is okay, but reading it, I can understand, because I also see where I don't think that Dave takes advantage of the tools and resources that are available to him to not be stuck. And
I'm more likely to do that with a one-off than a series that I feel like I got to explain the first 5 books to everybody.
I'm with Dave on this, because the only person that I can take a story problem to is Sean, and that's not even true if I'm too far in. Like, because then you're like, well, I don't know the background, I don't know the context. I mean, I've tried that. Like, I've brought story problems to other people, and it's like the rhythm is just off. They're great suggestions. They're smart people, creative people, but it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, and I can feel this on this version of the book, on this last book, that I'm reading it, and a lot of times I'll read a book that's really late, and I get in the edit, and I'm like, motherfucker should have just asked for help, right? But in this particular context, it's one of the very few times I can look at it and say, I understand why Dave couldn't include me on this, because he was wrapping a lot of stuff up, and he could have done it for motivation reasons, and I think there is value in that. It's like what you were saying earlier, Johnny. Like, if you and I know who in the company I need to go pull me into, hype me up, make me feel good, so I can go write.
You're the man.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in that, and perhaps Dave could have tapped into that. But mechanically, I don't know that there's much I could have done to help him with this. I might have actually given him suggestions that weren't as good as the ones he came up with himself because he had more.
Well, the pump up is a valid thing. I mean, I'll just spotlight that. So when I was in the midst of the anonymous project that I guess we don't want to name,
we need story fluffers.
Is there was nobody who could help me with that. Like I knew there wasn't. I mean, Sean knew the story, but it had gotten so convoluted, and both of us couldn't keep track.
I knew maybe 8 of the 36 layers of the story.
Yeah, I mean, it was just so like there were many versions. We literally couldn't remember whether events happened in version 1, version 2, version 3, or the beats and no actual versions. That was a real thing, and I was so far into it anyway that everything had changed, and nobody else obviously knew the story. But there were a few times when I sort of, and I think I basically said it. I was like, dude, can you just tell me that I'm a good boy, or so, it was like that sort of thing. I mean, it was just like, can you please just kind of fluff me up a little bit on this? And it changes nothing. And the conversation I'm actually thinking of, I think all I did was, it's like that episode of Friends where they get the dog to cheer Joey up and instead he depresses the dog. So it's a little like, I think Sean left that discussion like, well,
seen that one.
Yeah, they get him a dog named, he doesn't know his name, so Joey calls him Mozzarella.
Oh, I have to see that one.
And he gets the dog to cheer him up, and then he depresses the dog. So
yeah, it's Phoebe gives it to him because Phoebe's like, this dog makes everyone happy. This dog will make you happy. And she's like, what did you do to my dog?
So I think that Sean left that discussion like almost like all I had done was offload some of my angst onto Sean, and nothing had changed except that it was like, okay, well, somebody understands me just a little bit more. Like there is a spirit of like somebody's there, even if there's nothing they can do, that makes a difference. And if I didn't have a writing partner, then it would have been Robin or something like that. Like I think it can be anybody.
Well, people need to be seen and heard and validated, and that's all really important. And so
I usually call sex lines, tell me I'm a good writer.
Has that ever worked?
All the time. That's why I'm always late.
Quill all over me.
So, okay, what about mechanically with an actual?
Well, yeah, I was actually just going to say that. So I think that we sound, and I've been very dismissive in the past, and Sean and I both probably still come across as dismissive because we're like, oh, there's no such thing as writer's block, blah blah. And we don't literally mean there's no such thing. We're just usually doesn't mean what people think it means. But I think I would draw a line in the sand and say that for beginning writers, I think there's a chance of legit mechanical, like you just literally do not know what's coming next. And that to me feels like an experience problem, which is different from like anything that happens to me now is emotional. It's in my head somehow. Even if it manifests as a problem on the page, I know that I can solve problems on the page if I'm in my right mind. So if I can't, it means that something's fucked up here. So how do we reconcile both of those, like structural problems versus, we've already talked about the emotional stuff. So what about structural problems for people who just don't know what to do next, literally?
Well, I think that a lot of times when writers are looking for what should happen next, it's kind of the wrong question. It's going back to, are you solving for the right problem? And I think the right problem is like, what's not working about what came before, because stories are usually natural, right? Like if a lot of times the next thing to happen feels kind of organic if you're telling the right story. So maybe you took a wrong turn, and then it's just going back and asking, okay, when's the last time I felt stuck? Maybe there's something wrong there. And just asking yourself a lot of questions can give you answers. So for all of us, anytime we're getting on a story meeting, a lot of times, we've done this a lot in stuff that Johnny and I write, where the purpose of me following right behind him on a story is so that I'm well-versed in the story, so that we can get on a call and just talk about, oh, well, what if this, what if that? What do you think?
We used to do that all the time. We haven't done it in about 4 years. Yeah. So like that was a standard thing. Now we do a story meeting at the beginning and then it's turned in, and we seldom talk along the way. But that was the old process.
Well, yeah, because the last project, actually the last several projects, one we have now both, actually, I didn't realize this until just now, but both of you guys are finishing a series right now, right? Dave just finished a series, you're finishing a series, and the series you're finishing, Johnny, is pretty complicated. There's some big ideas
Complicated
there.
with a several year gap in the middle, like
Yeah.
not in the timeline of the story, but in our writing of it.
And then the one before that was the year plus project. So it was just so big. But now I think we're both hungry to get back to that way that we used to kind of just like pick at a story until it was told. And there is a lot of fun in that. But I think the main thing that keeps us going there is asking questions. Why are we doing this? What does the character want? You know, and it's not about what's the next cool thing that could happen. And I think that a lot of plot-driven writers, that's where their head is. You know, what's the next thing that should happen? And it's more like, why should that thing happen? And how is it an appropriate callback to something you've already set up? So it's almost like, well, actually, never mind.
Are you talking about like in Glass when they were building up to a big epic battle? Instead, they said, fuck it, let's just fight in the parking lot.
Worst ending ever.
Yeah, that was so anticlimactic. It was just. Yeah,
you can just imagine the meetings where they're like, well, we can't afford this location because we're using M's personal money. But what if we just talk about it and then we pretend that it's a switcheroo and we pretend it's a plot device?
Yes. Okay. So exactly that. What Johnny just said is there wouldn't be anything wrong with that parking lot battle if it was led up to, but they spent a lot of time. And they could have done it opposite. They could have led up to a parking lot battle and then had it in a bigger, better location.
In a Target.
Yeah. Instead, they promised steak and then, you know.
Well, and I don't want to get too far off of this, but there have been some pretty epic battles in some pretty shitty places. So like stairwells, you know?
What about Old Boy?
Yeah, well, that's what I was referring to.
Yeah,
that's what I'm referring to. So like you have, and I actually don't know the genesis of that scene, but I'm sort of thinking that was literally a hallway. I don't know that was a set.
Old Boy was a hallway.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can do that shit. Okay, well, I don't know how we got off to talking about this. This isn't really plots of stories and getting stuck, but anyway.
But it is, because Glass is actually a really good example. I expected that fight to take a certain place because he, as a storyteller, told me that's where it's going to take place. And it wasn't like it was a twist that it's in the parking lot. It's just a stupid thing that happened, right? A twist is supposed to change the energy of the story in some way and say, hey, look at what I just did with the sleight of hand. There was no sleight of hand.
It's an aha moment, not an, oh, fuck that.
Do you guys remember when you were young and your mom was like, we're going to Disneyland? And then she was like, ooh, epic plot twist, the dentist. And you were all like, oh, that's amazing.
Epic plot twist. We're going to the vet to put your cat down.
Oh, Dave
You're
takes
a bad
it
boy and Santa doesn't.
Level.
Santa's not real. Neither is God. Fuck you.
Oh,
I think he's talking to Stan.
What's that?
Stan's
I would go back
telling
to
him he has a wicked stiffy.
sometime before when Sean was talking about like, well, okay, so back to people, beginning writers who get stuck mechanically. I would say that another thing that can happen there is I've seen, and I've done this when I was newer, is you drive towards something without a clear reason for it. So if you get to the epic battle scene is wrong, but a major confrontation, or they had to go somewhere, they had to go to the quantum, they had to go to CERN or something. So like there's this long trek to go to CERN, which is the Swiss particle physics laboratory. And then you get them there successfully, and then you don't know what to do. Well, it's probably because you never were clear on why the hell they were going there in the first place.
It's because CERN sounded cool, and you're thinking of it as a set piece, and you're
right. Like Carl.
Right. Wouldn't it be cool if there were a really big explosion with the particle accelerators at CERN? Okay, let's get our characters to CERN. And then you're like, well, there's no reason for an explosion. It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons I haven't had any actual story trouble in a long time, other than, the zombie thing actually, this fits my point perfectly. The reason I haven't had story issues in a long time is because I've been working very closely with Bonnie for a while, and she always brings things back to character. And if you're solving character issues, if you're sticking with character arcs and what's going to satisfy their emotional journey, then the other stuff is more natural, you know, because you're not going to pick a stupid explosion as stern if it doesn't satisfy your characters. And if you're answering that question ahead of time, you're never going to find yourself in that place. So the zombie story I had a hard time with, I didn't answer any of those emotional character questions, like none of them. And so, I mean, I did through the story, but not before I started the story. And so that meant that the story had more of a like herky-jerky flow to it, where like what you said earlier, Johnny, that it's kind of like mystical. When you're in flow, like the story just comes, but that's usually because you really have an understanding of what these characters want or need and how they interact with each other. And as long as you have that understanding, then you can have pretty raw building blocks as far as what has to happen next.
What if you don't? What if you're just like, this story will not go no matter how much I bang on it? What steps would you take, either of you?
Whiskey bottle and a bullet.
Wow.
That's the Hemingway solution.
A strong beam and a short rope. Well, I mean, Dave, no, all jokes aside, like you nuke and pave, right? Like I'm just going to start this over and.
Yeah, I have deleted very, very many thousands of billions of words.
Dave's like one of those Renaissance painters where after they die, they strip away and discover there's other paintings underneath paintings.
Stories beneath the stories.
I've definitely done the nuke and pave. And I know that as of last year, Johnny, you did the nuke and pave on the biggest project you ever
That's
wrote.
the only one I've ever done, though, because my style is that it's really, really hard for me to back into a corner that is an irrevocable corner. Like that's almost part of my kung fu, honestly, is a little bit like I like to get backed into a corner and then some great stuff comes out. That's the only one where I was just like, it just isn't worth it.
And that was 90,000 words that you tossed?
I think it was 85, 90. It was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I've thrown away a couple of books. I've walked away from a few projects. But I will say I've never, this goes back to, you have writer's block if you're, not energized by it, you're not prepared, then you're writing the wrong thing. So I've never walked away from a project that I really wanted to write and couldn't get it to work. If I want to write it, there's always a way to get it to work.
All right, I got a question for Dave because I'm thinking that a lot of people have this problem. So Dave, you said a few times that before you met Sean, you started and abandoned a bunch of projects.
Oh yeah.
And I did the same thing, actually. Like even after Fat Vampire, I had one or two that I started and I was just like, it just didn't go anywhere. So what do you tell, any advice for people like that, where it's just like, you just over and over, okay, I'll try something different. Okay, that didn't work. I'll try something different. Okay, that didn't work. At what point do you go, I need to do something else?
Well, what time do you ship, right? Is that what you're saying? Like when do you finally commit?
Well, I never got to the point where it was shippable. I would get to like act one if I was even thinking in acts. It just wouldn't go anywhere.
Because you weren't willing to commit, because the next night, like for Dave,
I don't know, because it was brand new. This doesn't happen anymore.
So Dave has the my next project is sexier than my present project.
Well, I'm going back to pre-finished book Dave. I'm talking about people who haven't finished their first book and you don't know how to get past that.
So two things happen. One is I was a reporter at a newspaper for a few years, and I had regular deadlines, but it's not just that, it's the frequency in which I wrote. It gave me a confidence. I learned how to trust myself more and to actually finish stuff. And I wrote, I would write either a regular news article or a news piece, or I would write a column, or I'd write a very expansive, in-depth, multi-issue thing, diving into complex things. So I developed a skill set there that I was able to carry into my writing. But when I met Sean, there was it was sort of a, I think, okay, so my big thing when I was growing up, like the biggest person who believed in me was my best friend Todd, who died. And after he died, I sort of like kind of gave up on that part of myself, the writing, and I kind of switched to comics. So when I met Sean, and I sent him this part of a story that I had, and he just he wanted to see it. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to edit it or anything." So then he edited it and made it better. So I suddenly like, fuck, I have a confidence there that if I fall down, Sean will be able to help with the story. Like there's somebody I could trust, like a partner on a high wire or something. I don't know. I'm
A spotter holding hands under you.
Well, somebody that like I didn't trust myself enough to finish story. So I had Sean, and he's like, he would be able to either help me fix it or tell me where I went wrong. And I trusted him because his storytelling ability was fucking phenomenal. So together, like, I was like, well, when we started working, it's like, well, fuck, we're awesome together. So let's just keep doing that. I don't know. It's a confidence of having a partner. I don't know how you do it on your own other than to just keep doing it. Like, I think I'd have the confidence now. And like a lot of our projects, like short stories and stuff, they're just stories I come up with and Sean will edit or whatever, but it's not like he's not as part of that process for the short stories.
Well, this is going to sound like a joke, but it's actually not. My understanding is that often you and Sean will work up a story, work up beats, and then either all at once or over time, you dismiss all those beats and write new ones and then write the story. So you really are doing it yourself. It's almost like you just need a running start or knowing that somebody's there or something like that.
Well, there's also now, because there's an expectation that I want to deliver a story for Sean, because, you know, he's waiting on it and he's going to do his part. He's investing in me. He's investing his time into this story, and I would be stupid to fucking ignore all that. So there is sort of that expectation and somebody waiting on you that helps me finish the story. Otherwise, I might like, okay, so if there were no such like if I was paid regardless of my story output, like the government sent me a weekly check and said, okay, just write whatever, I might not ever finish a story because I would never think it's good enough. Like it would never be complete enough to me. But, you know, there's a realistic deadline that and also readers. You don't want to lose all of your fucking readers because you took 9 years to finish a goddamn story.
So you don't have that inherent, like, inborn desire to just crush the story for its own sake?
I do, but I always have
It's
that
he has the desire.
doubt.
It's the follow through. That's
Right.
not.
Well,
that's
it's
not
the
there.
doubt. It's not even a follow through because I'm doing the work. I'm just like, I lose faith somewhere in the story, and I need to like kind of hold on to that anchor.
Yeah, you know what though? I think that is so a part of the process. You know, there's got to. This isn't true for Johnny with most stuff that he writes, but I think it's true for most storytellers that I've ever met, and certainly for me. I think I'm a good writer for sure, but still, every draft, there's some point I'm like, this fucking sucks. Like this sucks, and I'm not having fun. And I love my job. I love writing. It's still really hard to do it every single day. That's why I have to write every single day, because it's exercise. You know, writing once I'm going is almost always a fluid process, and whenever like my block ends and my timer goes off, I'm like, man, that was awesome. Why did that take me half an hour to? Like, there are times when I'm writing in half-hour blocks. It takes me a half hour to write a half hour. And then I'm like, why did I waste all that time? Because the half hour that I wrote was really rewarding, and I like these words. But for some reason, there's just
I have false starts sometimes, but for me, it feels like preparation. I don't know if that's the case for you. So, like, I will often reread what I've written partially in a chapter if I haven't finished the chapter, rather than just kind of like rereading the last paragraph and going. And it does feel like a waste a little bit at the beginning. I'm like, I just want to get going. I have words to write, but I do it most times, and I just wonder if it's part of my like having a cup of coffee in the morning, you know, something like that.
Well, I think, I mean, we're three different storytellers, and we all have different processes, right? It's not a right or wrong. It's what works for you that you could do over and over and over and over again. And for me, I know that writing is rewriting, that I need to get to the end of the story, and that if I think that something is bad, I'm probably not going to think that nearly as much when I come back to it. You know, when I'm actually at the editing stage, it's pretty rare. In fact, I don't know, maybe twice, where I've really not liked something that I wrote, and then I let it sit, and then I come back to it, and I still feel that way about it. It's usually like, oh, what was I worried about? This
Yeah,
is fine.
that's interesting to hear you say that, because I would say I'm real tempted to say 100% of the time, and the only thing that's stopping me is absolutes, or usually feel like a trap. But I think I always know a badly written scene when I write it. And I think I always know a good scene when I write it. And since for me, writing really isn't rewriting, not in the way that a lot of people, because I tend to, my first draft is usually mostly complete. The bad scenes are just objectively bad, and there's not a lot I can do. And I do have to kind of tweak those, but they're few and far between. So there is this, it's an excitement and it's a pressure to try and get it on the first, it's getting it on the first take, and I guess that would create a different dynamic. One thing that I think is occurring to me, at least for my style, is for a while there, I was saying that I never thought in beats. And so having a plan was the magic ingredient that made me go forward. And I actually think that that's only partially true now. I think that it's true, but I think there's a bigger factor, or at least an as big factor. And to me, it's a success mentality. I think that one of the best things I can do is do something well in order to be able to write well. So like if I'm feeling unaccomplished in everything, I'm not going to be able to write well. But if I'm stuck and I can do something where I can have some success, I don't know what that would be. If I played an instrument really well, then I would say if I just went and kicked ass on something like that, I could see that success, because it's a little bit of like, oh yeah, you can be awesome. So here's a way that you can be awesome in your writing. It's more of it is a confidence. It's what Dave said. But for me, I think that's an even bigger confidence, because then I can plow through a lot of problems if I'm confident. But if I'm not, even the best beats sometimes don't do shit for me.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I think that one other thing that is definitely can really work, but can also work against you. So it's one of those use with caution things, is to let something sit. So if you let a draft sit and then you come back to it, sometimes fresh eyes are awesome.
Oh, why wouldn't you let me do that with the last one? I wanted to let it sit for 6 months.
But the last one is a good example of how dangerous that can be. Johnny and I have this with our open boxes. We've let them sit for a long time, and now, getting back into them, knowing the world, knowing the characters, knowing all of that, it's hard. It's just a much, much harder job than if we had hit it sooner. So it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes the amount of space that you give something allows you to hit it with fresh eyes, and the stuff that I write, both my rough draft of and that I give it an edit, I prefer to write something else and then go back and edit that and then hit it a little bit fresh. Sometimes the schedule doesn't really allow for that, and I just write it and then I edit it. But I do notice that if I give it at least a few weeks worth of space, then I come back. I'm not as judgmental of it, but I also have objectivity that helps me to make it that much better.
Yeah, interestingly, that I don't think that does work for me. That's interesting. I think that I need to accept that when I set something aside, unless I'm whipped into it, I'm going to leave it aside. I don't want to go back to it. Maybe that's a good thing to close on, though, because you mentioned series and stuff. Maybe we just flesh this out a little bit. Is what are our tips and tricks for getting back into something that has sat for a really long time? Series that need to continue. Maybe you wrote a book in the middle.
I think it's a mistake to just start writing. I think you have to step into it almost like as a fan of your previous work and go and read that stuff. So
but
I know
steep, more than analyze, steep.
Yeah. So I know you're doing that for a few projects we have coming up. You're kind of one of your jobs to prepare for this is to go read other stuff that we've written. In fact, Johnny said earlier in this year, I really want to read something that I haven't written, which isn't a thing you normally hear Johnny say.
Well, sometimes you do hear me say it because I am my own favorite author. So there is that. Sorry. But I think that, I don't know. It depends on the complexity of the project. So the Beam is our most complicated world. When we return to the Beam, I'm extremely intimidated by that just because there's so much and it's sprawling. So there are accessory series, even by other authors, that are Beam canon, right? Like we have, as a matter of fact, this isn't even under another author now.
Season 2 audio has 18 voice actors.
Right. It's really complicated. And even like Future of Sex, which is now a Platin Truant title, like that is Beam canon. I need to respect Future of Sex when we write Beam 4 and 5. But there are other things like the project I'm finishing right now, the project I'm going to work on after this, where it's sufficient to read the book. And we had audio for some of that, so I can listen to the audio and then I can just read the story quickly, and I'll highlight things on my Kindle that feel appropriate, like this character said this thing that was portending the future or something. So, but it is about a steeping. It's emotional for me. It's like, do I feel the world? Am I like, I'm either in beam mode or not? And beam mode is very different from literary mode. You know, like once I'm like, okay, I can get in there and push those ones and zeros, that feels different. But as far as details in the world, I mean, I guess you can kind of to some degree rely on other people to correct your, fact check you, but I don't think a lot of people have that luxury, right? You kind of need to be able to fix
I
yourselves.
think you have to do that. I think that you have to refamiliarize yourself with the world, not just because you want to get your facts straight, but I think you need to be excited about writing there. And if you're only returning to the world because you've got to like close a box, which we've had to do that. There are books that we've had to write because we promised that we would write them. And so there wasn't money in it really. And it's hard when there's not money or joy and you're just doing it to, answer a promise. That sucks. So the best way to go about that is to get as excited as you can. Go read the other books, remember what it was you liked about it, because you wouldn't have written it if you didn't like it at all, right? And you wouldn't be having to answer that promise if readers didn't like it at all. So one of the hardest things that projects Dave and I ever had to finish was the third season of White Space. So the first two were some of our favorite things that we'd ever done, really well reviewed. Readers really liked that series, but we had like 7 years in between, season 2 and when we're going to write season 3. That's a long time. So
you haven't written it yet. You still have this to look forward to.
No, we wrote it. We wrote it.
Oh, okay, because you said when we were gonna. I didn't know if you meant the future, but yeah.
No, yeah, we did. But it was like going back and saying, what was it that really excited us about this? Because and there were a few things. There was characters. There were setting. There were elements that we really loved about that story, and we had to focus on that and not just this is something we have to finish, because then it's brutal. If you're doing something just to do it, you're not going to have flow, and flow is what gets you into that magical place, that you referred to, Johnny. And that is, if you've never had flow as a writer, it's like saying you've never had an orgasm while having sex. It's the most beautiful part of the creative process, when you just lose yourself and then you come back and you're like, wow, I wrote that, I created that, these characters are saying things, I invented all of this. It really is magical, and you're a little bit almost disconnected because you're so connected, and that's a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, I think the Beam is the only world that really intimidates me because there's so much factual stuff left as far as open boxes. The others aren't that bad. I do think, and this is maybe sort of, I don't know how much this tip is going to apply to a lot of other people, but I will say that for myself, I think I want to do one of two things. I think I either want to write as many standalones as possible, or when we write series, to keep them relatively short and to write them as close together as possible. We used to write a book and then maybe the next year we'd get back to writing the sequel, and no, I don't like that. It's got to be all in a row. Even long-standing series. So I did The Vampire Maurice as like a just drop one every once in a while, and I'm already like, well, of course I didn't keep continuity out of that. That was the whole idea, was that they would be, you could read them in any order. But of course I've got, stuff in the background and need to remember. And that's what kills me, is the kind of actuarial shit that has to happen to keep track of details. Like, I'm not a spreadsheet person, and that feels like spreadsheets.
Well, it's knowing who you are as a storyteller and knowing your process. So like specifically with the thing that I'm outlining for you right now, I know you better as a storyteller now. This big monster project and some of the changes that we've made have helped with that. And it's a fact. I mean, our 84,000 word version of the novella is evidence. It's a fact. 100% of the Realm and Sands stories get more complicated not less. Nothing's ever simpler.
And that will
always,
not change. There's no way around it.
right. It's not going to change. So that means we have to change the way that we organize our stories on the outline level and make sure that they're character-based, location-based, interest-based, and like smaller prompts. If we get really detailed in this has to happen, and this has to happen, and this has to happen, the stories become unwieldy. And so, you know, we've got
focus on fewer things. Is that sort of how you did it?
Yeah.
Because as I was going through, I'm listening to the audiobook for the first one right now, and this will be the sequel, is I've just made notes of like 3 or 4 things that I consider to be what needs to be followed up on in the future. It's not all the details. It's not like which side is this guy's hair parted on? You know, it's just right. What are the biggest thematic things we care about, and the rest will shake out. I trust that at this point.
Do you want to send those to me?
Yeah. Why don't I just? Yeah, I can just tell you when we stop recording. Actually, they're brief, or I can send them to you.
Cool. Well, no, Audible's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, any final thoughts on getting stuck and all that stuff? Anybody?
My suggestion is just get through it, even if it's painful. You know, get through the rewrite. But you have to. Writing is a muscle, and if you train yourself to get through it, then your body will remember that, your mind will remember that. And if the opposite is true, I mean, there's a lot of writers out there who get 3/4 done with 50 books, and that doesn't do anything for anyone. And you're telling yourself the story that this next book will be different, but you're not doing anything to make it different. It's not going to happen on its own.
I would say if it's possible, have 2 stories. Either if you're really running into block, if you do short stories, bang out one of those. So you're still writing and your time isn't wasted. Or if you're able to actually write 2 stories at once, like I think Stephen King, I don't know how much he does that, but if you're able to go between stories, do that just so you're writing something, because the less you write, the harder it becomes to write.
And you'll be able to exercise that muscle as well.
Yeah, and you also the other added bonus is, because like me, when I'm writing one thing, I'm thinking about the other thing I want to write, or something that I will be able to write. So if you do that and you do switch while you're writing that second thing, you might, that first thing, yeah, that's what I need to do. So it might trick yourself.
Refreshingly upbeat answer from Dave. I thought your writer's block suggestion, if you were going to list the LD50 for many narcotics, that to take care of the pain. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to the Story Studio podcast. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.